program today. In February, I attended the first meeting of the Leadership Davidson County seminar, and in that introductory session we had that day is where the first time I've ever met or heard this fella. And Ray Howell is he's a native of Alabama. He's served as the senior minister of First Baptist Church in Lexington since 1990. He's also involved, I believe, on the board, Ray, if I'm not mistaken, of Baptist Children's Home. He's a published author, written several books on various topics, including Davidson County history. You can find his books in Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Conrad Hinkle has copies of his book. I found him intriguing as he started to relate the history going all the way to the very beginning of how even Davidson County got its name. And in his presentation back in February, and Dee will remember this, there was a tie-in there between how the big chair got to Thomasville, and there was a Rotary Club connection from back in, what was it, the 1920s. But anyway, at that point, I decided I've got to talk to this man after he's done and see if he would be willing to talk to our club and share some of his knowledge of our history here in Thomasville and the county. And so I'd like, if you don't mind, I want to introduce Ray Howell. Hey, Ray, thank you for being with our club today.
Chuck, thank you. I've looked forward to being with you, but I was really looking forward to that fried chicken. So I'll take a rain check on that if that's okay.
Well, I guess in the spirit of Wayne Underwood, I'll show you this.
Yeah.
There you go, Wayne.
Yeah, you've always got to drive through at the Colonel. So, but it's good to see everybody. It's good to see Sam barefoot. I've known Sam for years through the Baptist Children's Home. I hadn't been on the board of the Children's Home, but I've been involved in a lot of other ways. And the first thing I wanted to tell you is how much I appreciate what all of you are doing through the Rotary Club, and especially in the community of Thomasville. Civic clubs play a vital role in our communities, and I think especially now. And it's tough. Years ago, all of our civic clubs were strong and had big numbers. I know here in Lexington, we've lost the Civitan Club, we lost the JCs. The Rotary Club in Lexington used to be a very strong club. The numbers are way down. I'm in the Kiwanis Club in Lexington. Our numbers are down. We have around 100 members now. Chuck, I think you said you all are about 80 in your membership, which is a really good size club. And I can just tell from your conversation that you're making a big difference in Thomasville. And so thank you for your community service. Now, I want to tell you something in full disclosure. A number of years ago, when I first moved to Lexington, I've been in Davidson County about 30 years. In fact, I just had my 30th anniversary. Well, I was always fascinated with the big chair. Even before I moved to Lexington, I always loved the big chair. And shortly after I came here, I wrote a story for the Lexington Rotary Club. I actually delivered it at the Rotary Club one day in Lexington about the big chair. I made the whole thing up. It was fiction, and it was some far-fetched story. I don't even know that I even have a copy of it anymore, but it was just it was all in fun. And I told the story about how the big chair came to be. And there was a lady in the Rotary Club in Lexington that worked for the county that actually was also in the Thomasville Women's Club. I can't remember who that was. She was a long time, I don't know if she was in clerk of court or something like that. But anyway, she invited me to come to Thomasville to the Thomasville Women's Club. And you all know that club has been around for over 100 years and has made a huge difference in your community. And so I gave that far-fetched story. Now, this was probably 28, 27 years ago. Let me tell you, the ladies didn't appreciate it very much. And I've never, ever been invited back to the Thomasville Women's Club. So I hope maybe I'll get invited back to the Rotary Club one day. But at that time, I did not know the real story about the big chair. But I discovered the story. Some of you may have seen this book. Uh, this is a book that I wrote back in 2001 on Davidson County history. It has a lot of great pictures in it. But when I was writing that book, I discovered the true story of the big chair that I'm sure most of you probably know. And I think it's a great, great story. This couldn't be fiction. Only real life could give you something like this. Back in 1922, Thomasville had a population of about 6,000. And Thomasville, North Carolina was truly the chair city. It was producing more chairs than any other city in the country, any other city in the world. There was a newspaper back then called the Chairtown News. And the editor was a guy by the name of Charles Sturkey. And you got to love this guy, Mr. Sturkey, who was the editor of the Chairtown News. He loved Thomasville. He loved his hometown, and he loved to brag about his hometown. I think everybody needs to love the town in which they live. You need to be proud of it. You need to brag about it when you go other places. So he went down to Spartanburg, South Carolina. And I don't know why he was down there, but he was invited to speak to the Rotary Club in Spartanburg, and he was bragging about Thomasville. He said, you know, we've only got 6,000 people, but we're producing more chairs than any other town in the whole wide world. Well, he must have had a little bit of preacher in him, because he just kept on going, kept on bragging, and finally he said, in fact, we're getting ready to build the biggest chair in the whole wide world. The problem was there wasn't an ounce of truth in it. Nobody had talked about building a big chair. He was just blowing smoke. Well, what he didn't know was one of the members of the Spartanburg Rotary Club wrote for the local newspaper. They wrote a story about Thomasville, North Carolina is getting ready to build the biggest chair in the world. The AP news service, it was either AP or UPI, one of those news services back then, picked up the story, and it got back to Thomasville before the editor did. So when he comes back home, people are saying, what's this about us building this big chair? We hadn't heard anything about it. Well, he had egg on his face, but I want to tell you what he did. He went to your club. He went to the Thomasville Rotary Club. He may have been a member of the club. He probably was. And he said, look, I got this situation on my hands. I sort of embarrassed myself by saying we were going to build this big chair. But it's not a bad idea, is it? And everybody in the club said, no, it sounds pretty good. And he said, well, let's do it. So with the help of the Thomasville Rotary Club, the biggest chair in the whole world was built back in 1922. I've got a picture of it. I don't know if you can see it or not. Can you see a little bit of there? You can see the lady sitting in the chair. The lady in the chair was Sadie Blair Fouts. She was a secretary at Standard Chair. Now, that picture, by the way, is in that little book. If you look at that, was a wooden chair. Obviously, that chair is long gone, but that's the story, the true story of how the big chair came to be. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. So I just thought that was fascinating. You know, the whole history of Thomasville is fascinating. Thomasville was not supposed to be the town that was supposed to evolve around the coming of the North Carolina Railroad in the 1850s was Cedar Lodge. John W. Thomas, that was his home, and he was a visionary. He knew that they were building a railroad. It went from Goldsboro to Charlotte, and actually the part that goes from Charlotte to Raleigh, if you take the Carolinian, if you ride on Amtrak, you ride on the original route of the North Carolina Railroad. But everybody was politicking to get the railroad to come through their town because they knew that it would bring business, that it would bring industry, that it would be a financial boom. He wanted the railroad to come through Cedar Lodge. There was going to be a town named Cedar Lodge, but he found out it wasn't coming through Cedar Lodge. It was coming a few miles to the west. Being the visionary that he was, he went out and bought all of this land, which is now downtown Thomasville. And that's how Thomasville came to be, and that's why it is named Thomasville in honor of your visionary founder. One of the stories that I told, and Chuck alluded to this, that there's so many great stories about Davidson County history. But one of the most fascinating stories about Davidson County is the fact that Lexington was not supposed to be the county seat of Davidson County. And that's a story in itself. Davidson County was actually part of another county. Anybody for extra credit want to tell me what the original county was? We were part of another county. Anybody know? Rowan County. If you go back to colonial times and you look at the counties in the colony of North Carolina, they were huge. And as time went on, most of these big counties were carved up into smaller counties. Rowan County was the original county. And in 1822, in the state legislature, a bill was introduced to create a new county. This county, which officially came into being in December of 1822, now that's 30 years before Thomasville came into existence. But this county was named for General William Lee Davidson, who was a hero of the Revolutionary War. By the way, you know, North Carolina used to extend as far west into present-day Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee is in Davidson County, Tennessee, named for the same Revolutionary War hero that our county is named after. Well, when the new county was formed in 1822, everyone just assumed that Lexington was going to be the county seat because it was the only established town in the county at that time. But not so fast. There were a number of new counties that were being created in the 1820s, and the state legislature said, if you're going to have a new county, the county seat needs to be as close as possible to the geographic center of that county. So the state sent some surveyors to the new county named Davidson. They did a survey. Lexington is not the geographic center of Davidson County. They found the center of the county. There was a fellow by the name of Martin Owens who had a big farm. And I imagine he was surprised one day when they knocked on his door and said, oh, by the way, your land is right in the center of the new county. We want to purchase some of your land. They purchased 108 acres, paid him $300. And they carved up those 108 acres into lots, and they created a new town. The new town was named Marion. The original Marion, North Carolina, was not in the mountains. That Marion didn't come into existence until about 18 in the 1890s. The original Marion, North Carolina, was right here in Davidson County. And they had already carved it up into lots, and people were purchasing property and people were going to start businesses. But there were some people in Lexington that were not real happy about that. If you come to downtown Lexington and you drive down Main Street, the oldest house in Lexington, it's a beautiful old home that will be on your right if you're going south, is called the Homestead, and it belonged to Dr. William R. Holt. By the way, do some of you know Joe Wallace, who is the head of the Lexington Chamber now? Joe is a direct descendant of the Holt family. Well, Dr. Holt was the first physician in Lexington. He was one of the founders of the oldest church in Lexington, which is the Grace Episcopal Church. He was a community leader, and he wasn't happy at all that Lexington was not going to be the county seat. So he decided to do something about it. He actually took the matter to court in October of 1823 he protested the survey saying that it was not accurate. Well, the court agreed with him and told him to seek the advice of experts. At that time, the greatest expert on land surveys happened to be the president of the University of North Carolina, a fellow by the name of William Caldwell. He was what they called back in the 19th century an astronomical advisor. I've never heard that term before. But there are two guys by the name of William and Mason who were astronomical advisors. You've heard of William and Mason. They were the guys that set boundaries. And this guy Caldwell, who was the president of the University of North Carolina, had actually set the state boundaries for Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. He was the leading expert on setting boundaries in the 1820s. And he was the president of the University of North Carolina. And so Dr. Holt took the results of the survey, and Dr. Caldwell, it may have helped that he was an old professor of his. It may have helped that he liked Dr. Holt, but he declared the results of the survey null and void, which there may be a little something about going to Chapel Hill and getting something declared that seemed pretty logical, null and void, but I won't go there with all of that. But the problem was, it was pretty obvious that Lexington was still not the geographic center of the county. It's what happens in a lot of cases. It comes down to a political election. Because you see, a new county has to have representatives in the legislature. You have to have a senator. You have to have a member of the Senate, and you have to have a representative. And so there was a political election. A fellow by the name of Alexander Caldwell ran against a man by the name of Smith. You know, the community college, if you're going south on Business 85, just past the community college, there's a little service road. I believe the cable company, Spectrum Cable, is on that road. Look at the name of that road. That's Caldwell Drive. It's named for Alexander Caldwell. Everybody knew that if they voted for Caldwell, he wanted Lexington to be the county seat. If you voted for Smith, he wanted Marion to be the county seat. For the legislature, there was a guy by the name of Jesse Hargrave. And by the way, if you come to Lexington, my church, First Baptist Church, is next to the YMCA. There's a little street between my church and the YMCA called Hargrave Street. it's named for Jesse Hargrave. Everybody knew that if you voted for Jesse Hargrave, Lexington was going to be the county seat. If you voted for the other guy, it would be Marion. Well, let me tell you about the results. Alexander Callclew won his election by 4 votes. Jesse Hargrave won his election by 2 votes. It were those votes made the difference in Lexington being the county seat of Davidson County and not Marion. So what happened to Marion? Well, the county went back and purchased that land from the people who had bought it, thinking it was going to be the county seat. The county kept the land. And today, the brand new Davidson County Sheriff's Office is located on that land that was originally part of Martin Owen's farm, as well as the Davidson County Schools office. And if you go just past the sheriff's office, you're going to notice a little road off of Highway 64. It's called Marion Drive. It's the only reference to Marion left in Davidson County. And in 1890, a new town was formed in the mountains, and they took the name Marion. So you see how close we came to Lexington not being the county seat. They're all kind of great stories, but let me just share one more thing with you in closing. And I've been here 30 years, and there was something I noticed from the time that I moved to Davidson County. There seemed to be this little dynamic going on, maybe more than just friendly competition between the towns of Thomasville and Lexington. Is that just my imagination? Or is there something there? Now, at first, I thought it was just football. Who was the guy that used to broadcast the Thomasville high school football games for years and years? Anybody remember who that was? Well, let me tell you a connection I have with Thomasville football. Anybody know the name George Cushwa? I mean, everybody's nodding their head. He's a legend in Thomasville. George Cushwa's mother was a member of my church in Roxborough. I was pastor of the Baptist church in Roxborough from 1982 to 1990. And one day, Miss Bessie, as we all called his mama, had her birthday, and I went by her house on her birthday, and I met the legendary George Cushwa. He found out that I was from Alabama, and I grew up with Bear Bryant and Alabama football, and we immediately formed a good friendship. And I remember when George got sick. I remember when he died. I actually came to Thomasville for his funeral service, and that was a tragedy. So I had a connection with Thomasville football. I also had a connection with Lexington football, because I don't know if any of you knew Harold Bowen, who was the mayor of Lexington at one time and used to work with Woody Durham at the University of North Carolina football broadcast. He broadcast Lexington high school football for 50 years. The last 10 years that he broadcast, I was his color guy. I was the guy that sat in the booth beside him. And as I said, I was his interpreter. He would make a call and I would say, now what Harold was trying to tell you was. So I did Lexington football for 10 years. And I remember the Lexington Thomasville games were always the most exciting. But I really wanted to try to get to the bottom of what was going on. It had to be more than football. And let me tell you something that is very relevant to what is going on today. In 1918, as we've all been reminded, there was a global pandemic, the influenza or Spanish flu. At that time, the commissioners of Lexington decided to quarantine the whole city and specifically said anybody from Thomasville cannot come into the town of Lexington. I don't know that it worked. If you go back, there were a lot of people who were affected by the influenza epidemic in Davidson County. I know that there were people in Thomasville. I think there were people in Lexington. But during that time, schools couldn't meet, civic clubs couldn't meet, churches couldn't meet. Same thing that's going on today. I wondered if that may have created some problems. But you know, when you look at what has happened through the years, I hope we're at the point now that we know that working together, we can be a lot stronger than we can trying to stay apart. A number of years ago, Lexington had a small hospital. Thomasville had a small hospital. There were a group of people who wanted the whole county to combine together and build a medical center around where the community college is located. Unfortunately, it never happened. As a result, Thomasville had their own hospital, Lexington had its own hospital, and we all know what has happened. Neither community hospital could survive, and so Thomasville went with Novant, Lexington went with Baptist, and I'm thankful that we do have two good medical centers now. But I think the best example of what we can do working together is found in the community college. Because Davidson County is privileged to have one of the greatest community colleges in this state. And the reason is because we worked together as a county, and we didn't let, the fact I'm from Lexington, I'm from Thomasville, enter into that. We were all together. And working together, we can deal with all the issues that we're facing, the challenges, and we can make our community stronger and better equipped to deal with the issues of the future. I could go on and on and on, Chuck, but I'll go ahead and stop. And if you have any questions, and I will be glad to come back again sometime in the future, because I mentioned the Thomasville Women's Club. One of the greatest stories in Davidson County history is the story of the library, and the Thomasville Women's Club had a huge role to play in that. But thanks for letting me be with you.
We thank you so much, Ray, for taking time out of your schedule. What an intriguing presentation that you had. And we'll definitely invite you back. And for sure, would love to have you come just as soon as we can get back into live meetings again at the Women's Club. I'll definitely you'll be our guest for some fried chicken. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's see.